The bus rattled along a cracked, forgotten road as dusk bled across the horizon. Aram pressed his forehead to the window, watching endless fields roll into mist. He was a university student, sent on a folklore research project, an assignment that seemed harmless when printed on paper. But the village of Daria Kalin was not on any official map. It was found only through whispers and wrong turns. When the bus finally stopped, there was no station, just a rusted signboard with faded Urdu letters and a path swallowed by trees. The driver didn't speak. He just nodded once, eyes fixed ahead, and shut the door behind Aram. The silence that followed was heavy, unnatural. The air smelled of damp soil and something else, something like iron. Crickets chirped for a moment, then went quiet, as if the forest itself held its breath. Aram walked, guided by the faint outline of houses in the fog. The village looked centuries old, mud walls, oil lamps flickering inside, shadows moving where people should have been. Every house had one thing in common. Their doors bore hand-painted symbols, uneven and deep, like they'd been carved to keep something out. He finally found the guest hut the university arranged. The caretaker, an old man with pale eyes, met him at the entrance. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "You came after dark. Not good. We close everything before sunset." Aram laughed nervously, brushing off the warning. But when the man bolted the door with 3 locks from the inside, the laughter faded. From outside, through the mist, something brushed against the window, a shape moving without sound. And for the first time since he arrived, Aram realized the forest hadn't been silent. It had been listening. The night in Daria Kalin stretched endlessly, the air too still for comfort. Inside the hut, the lantern's dim glow carved long, restless shadows across the walls. Aram couldn't sleep. Every creak of the wooden floor, every hiss of wind against the window, felt alive, deliberate. Around midnight, he heard a faint whisper from under the door. Not words at first, more like breathing, heavy and moist, as though someone stood inches away on the other side. Aram froze, staring at the bottom of the door where a sliver of darkness quivered like it was breathing back. He leaned closer, thinking it might be the caretaker. But then, the breathing shifted into a murmur. A woman's voice, broken and low, calling his name. Aram, his heart pounded. He hadn't told anyone his name except the caretaker earlier that evening. The whisper continued, growing harsher, scraping against the wood. "Open it, please." Aram stumbled back, grabbing the lantern. He didn't speak. He didn't move. The voice grew quieter, more desperate, until finally, silence returned. When dawn arrived, the caretaker unbolted the door, his hands shaking slightly. He looked at the floor outside and went pale. Aram followed his gaze. The soil was disturbed, covered in deep, uneven finger marks, like someone had clawed the ground all night. The old man muttered, "You should not answer. The one who does never speaks again." Aram tried to laugh it off, but his throat felt dry, his mind repeating that whisper, the way it said his name. Perfectly, he thought about the old houses, the strange symbols on every door. Maybe they weren't decorations at all. Maybe they were warnings, and somewhere behind the forest mist, something watched him leave the hut, quietly remembering the sound of his name. By morning, the mist had thinned, but the unease remained. The villagers, those few Aram saw, moved like ghosts, silent, hurried, eyes averted. They whispered about the chapel beyond the stream, a place he wasn't supposed to go. Aram noted every glance, every nervous flick of a hand when he mentioned the old church. That was where his investigation had to begin. The missing students, all 3, had been last seen heading there before vanishing. The path wound through dying trees and thick fog, the soil soft beneath his shoes. The silence pressed against his ears until he heard it. Faint chimes, like bells underwater. The chapel appeared slowly, swallowed by vines and time. Its wooden cross hung crooked, the door half collapsed. A smell of rot and iron leaking from within. Inside, pews lay scattered, crushed beneath the weight of decay. A single candle burned on the altar, flickering despite the absence of wind. Aram felt a sudden temperature drop, sharp enough to make his breath visible. He lifted his phone to record, but the camera glitched, static and distortion filled the screen. Then a flash of movement behind him. He turned. Nothing. Only the echoes of something that might have been footsteps. In the corner stood a cracked confessional booth. He approached, drawn by a low hum, like a prayer said backward. When he pushed the curtain aside, there was no one inside. Just an old book. Its pages were torn, stained, but one thing stood clear: a list of names. The last three were the students he was searching for, and below them, his own name, written in fresh ink. His pulse thundered. Someone had been expecting him. The candle extinguished. The air thickened. He tried to move, but his body felt paralyzed as whispers began. Hundreds of overlapping voices chanting in a language that scraped at his mind. And then, just before blacking out, he saw it through the dusted mirror above the altar. Figures kneeling in the pews, motionless, their eyes hollow and white, staring straight at him. When Aram woke, the chapel was empty again. The book was gone, but etched into his palm were faint marks, symbols matching the ones carved on every village door. That he realized then. This wasn't an investigation anymore. It was an initiation. When Aram left the chapel, dawn had already faded into a gray, unsteady morning. His legs trembled as he crossed the stream back toward the village, clutching his phone that refused to power on. His palm ached where the strange marks had appeared, thin, spiraling cuts that glowed faintly in the dark. He found his way to the small guest house where he was staying. The owner, an old woman with cataract eyes, stared at his hand the moment he entered. She didn't ask questions, she only whispered, "You've seen the chapel." Then she handed him a cup of water and turned away as if he no longer existed. Aram sat in silence, feeling the weight of her words. The walls of the room felt too thin. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps from the corridor. And when the wind pushed against the windows, it almost formed a whisper, "Don't leave." That night, sleep refused to come. The marks on his palm pulsed like they had their own heartbeat. Out of instinct, he traced the pattern onto a sheet of paper, each swirl and curve forming what looked like an ancient sigil. But the more he drew, the more the air seemed to shift, temperature dropping, shadows deepening. Then, the door creaked open on its own. A boy stood there, pale, his clothes torn, soaked as though he'd just walked through rain. That he didn't speak. He only pointed at Aram's hand and mouth. "They will come tonight." Before Aram could react, the boy vanished, his image flickering out like a dying flame. The power went out. The room sank into blackness. Only the faint red glow from his marks lit the space around him. Moments later, the sound began, faint dragging footsteps across the wooden floor outside. They grew louder, closer, slow, measured, like something that wasn't in a hurry because it knew he couldn't escape. Aram grabbed his bag, stumbling toward the back exit, but the door wouldn't open. Then, from behind him, came a hollow voice. "You shouldn't have taken the name." He spun around, and in the dim glow of his hand, he saw them. The three missing students, standing still, eyes empty, their faces pale and expressionless, but their lips moved in unison, whispering, chanting, calling him by name. Aram screamed, shoving the table aside and smashing through the window. Cold air sliced his skin as he fell to the dirt below. He ran until the guest house disappeared behind the fog. And there, on the edge of the forest, he stopped, because carved into every tree trunk around him were the same marks from his palm. They weren't symbols. They were seals, and one by one, they began to glow. The forest loomed like a living thing. The branches tangled into a black canopy that swallowed light and sound alike. Aram stumbled between the trees, breath ragged, his pulse thundering against the eerie quiet. Every step felt watched. The marks on his palm burned hotter now, faintly lighting the darkness like a living ember. He stopped when he heard it, a whisper drifting between the trees. It wasn't one voice. It was many, a chorus of overlapping murmurs, calling his name from every direction. He turned in circles, flashlight trembling in his hand, until it caught something carved into the bark of an ancient oak, a spiral identical to the one on his skin, but older, deeper, filled with dried blood. The air thickened. A smell of damp soil and iron rose around him. Then, faintly, he saw something move between the trees. White figures, slow, swaying, as though floating just above the ground. The missing students, the ones from the guest house. Now, they were following him. He broke into a run. Branches clawed at his arms as he crashed through the undergrowth, until the forest opened into a clearing. In the center stood a stone well, its edges wrapped in vines, its mouth black as a wound. From inside came the sound, whispering, faint but rhythmic, as if something down there was breathing in sync with him. Aram leaned closer. The wind around the well died completely. The forest fell silent. Then, a whisper from below, soft, female. He took what was ours. He stumbled back, tripping over a root. The ground around the well began to pulse with light, symbols glowing faintly beneath the soil. And when he looked down at his palm again, the lines had spread, crawling up his wrist like veins of fire. Panic surged through him. He tore at his sleeve, desperate to wipe the marks away, but they only burned brighter. Then he saw the pattern forming on the ground, the same sigil, wide and circular, encircling the well. The whispers became screams. Hands, pale, skeletal, erupted from the dirt around him, clawing toward his ankles. Aram scrambled backward, shouting, kicking free. The earth trembled, and from the well's depths came a blinding red glow. A figure began to rise, not human, not entirely. Draped in tattered robes, its face obscured, its body stitched from shadow and bone. It raised one hand toward him, and every mark on his body flared in answer. Then the whisper came again, from all around the forest, all at once. You are one of us now. The world tilted, spinning, the forest fading into a haze of darkness and echoing voices. When Aram opened his eyes again, he was back at the edge of the village, hours gone, dawn bleeding over the horizon. The forest stood quiet behind him, as though nothing had happened. But on the ground near his feet lay a trail of footprints leading toward the village square, all of them his own. And at the end of that trail stood the old woman from the guest house. She smiled, slow and knowing, and said only, "You woke it." The sun rose weakly over the village, painting the mist in dull silver. Aram's body ached, his mind heavy with fragments of the night. The well, the voices, the burning symbols. He followed the trail of his own footprints back to the square, where the old woman still waited by the stone fountain. Her eyes followed him with unsettling calm. "Why me?" he asked, though his voice was barely more than a rasp. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward the church bell tower in the distance. "It begins again tonight," she murmured, "and the forest has already marked you." Aram turned toward the tower. The bell had been silent since his arrival, yet its shadow stretched unnaturally long across the cobblestones, as though time itself bent around it. He knew now the village was hiding something ancient beneath its surface, something that thrived in silence as he walked through the narrow streets. Doors shut quickly behind him. Curtains twitched. No one spoke. Every wall bore faint carvings of the same sigils that now glowed beneath his skin. By midday, Aram reached the chapel again. But this time, he noticed the floor, faint seams between the stone tiles, arranged in a circle like a seal. He pried one loose with a rusted crowbar and found a staircase spiraling downward into blackness. The air below was cold, damp, and thick with the smell of earth and decay. The deeper he descended, the clearer the sound became, a rhythmic chanting, low and endless. Torches flickered along the walls, revealing murals of figures kneeling before a pit of red light. At the bottom lay a cavern carved from the rock itself. Dozens of villagers stood in silence, wearing masks made of bone, their hands marked with the same sigils as his. At the center, the old woman knelt before a stone altar, blood dripping from her palm into a bowl carved with symbols that pulsed like living veins. Aram froze, hidden in the shadows, watching. The chant grew louder, the torches burning higher as something began to rise from the pit. A shifting, black shape that bent the light around it. The old woman raised her arms. "The blood of the chosen returns," she intoned. "The circle completes once more." And then her gaze lifted, straight toward Aram. He stumbled back, but hands caught him from behind. The masked villagers surrounded him in silence, their grip unbreakable. The old woman approached, her face serene. "You were never here to save anyone," she said. "You came because it called you." They dragged him to the altar, pressing his marked hand against the stone. The symbols flared in unison, his, hers, the walls, all blazing with red light that throbbed like a heartbeat. A scream tore through the chamber, not from him, not from them, but from the pit itself, deep and ancient. And in that sound, Aram finally understood. The marks weren't a curse, they were a claim. The darkness below surged upward, swallowing light, stone, and sound alike. When the world steadied again, the villagers were gone. The torches were ash, and Aram stood alone beside an empty altar, his reflection faintly visible in the black pool before him. But it wasn't his reflection. It smiled when he didn't. The air was heavy, still wet from the darkness that had erupted from the pit. Aram stumbled up the stone staircase, his hand throbbing where the sigils still glowed beneath his skin. Every step echoed as though the ground itself was hollow, whispering back the sound of his breath. When he reached the surface, the chapel was empty. No villagers, no torches, only that same whispering wind that seemed to curl through every broken window and hollow doorway that he ran into the street. But the streets had changed. The layout was wrong. Paths that once led to the village square now turned toward dead ends. Houses repeated, same cracked windows, same door hanging by one hinge, same blood-stained lanterns swinging faintly in the breeze. The entire village had folded upon itself like a maze. Aram stopped, breathing hard. This isn't real," he muttered, but the whisper came again, a soft chorus of voices overlapping. "You were chosen. You cannot leave. You are part of the circle now." That he turned sharply, flashlight trembling in his hand, and pointed it toward the sound. A row of villagers stood at the far end of the path, motionless, masks of bone gleaming pale in the dark. He stepped back. They stepped forward. Their feet made no sound. Panic took over. He bolted toward the forest edge, following the faint trail he remembered from the night before. But the trees looked wrong, thicker, denser, twisting like veins through the mist. He ran for what felt like hours, yet the same church bell tower loomed in the distance no matter which way he turned. Exhaustion hit him like a wave. He fell to his knees beside a wooden fence, clutching his marked hand. The sigil pulsed again, brighter this time, a rhythm, beating in sync with something deep in the earth. Then, a voice, soft, familiar. "Aram," he froze. It was Miriam's voice, the nurse from the clinic, the one who'd vanished days ago when the sickness began. He turned, and there she was, standing beneath a dead oak tree, pale and trembling. Her eyes glowed faintly red in the dark. "Miriam," he whispered, "you're alive." She smiled weakly. "Alive? Not exactly." She stepped closer, her feet barely touching the ground. "It wants you to stop running. It hurts when you resist." He stumbled back, shaking his head. "No. I saw what's down there. Whatever this is, it's not me." Her voice softened, almost pleading. "Then why does it wear your face?" Aram froze. Slowly, he turned toward the church tower, and in one of its shattered windows, he saw it. His own reflection staring back at him, but smiling. The same wrong smile he'd seen in the black pool below. Miriam's voice turned hollow. You never left that pit, Aram. The one who came back up wasn't you. He blinked, and when he opened his eyes, Miriam was gone. Only the mist remained, whispering softly through the trees. The mark on his hand began to burn, the sigil spreading, crawling up his arm like ink. Everywhere he looked, the village stared back. The houses, the ground, even the clouds above, all shaped faintly like eyes. He ran again, desperate, until he reached the stone arch at the edge of town. Beyond it, the open fields stretched endlessly. He stepped forward, but the moment his foot crossed the boundary, everything went white, and he was back in the center of the village, standing by the fountain, where the old woman waited. You see now, she said, her voice soft as dust. No one leaves once chosen. The bell tower tolled for the first time in years, a sound so deep it shook the air. Aram looked up at the sky, the sigil burning through his chest, and whispered, "Then what happens now?" The old woman smiled. "Now, you remember what you were before the circle began." The ground trembled. The villagers' whispers rose in unison, and in that moment, the entire village seemed to breathe. The bell's echo didn't fade, it multiplied. Each toll rippled through the air like a heartbeat, and every wall, every tree, every soul in the village seemed to vibrate with it. Aram staggered backward, clutching his ears. The sound wasn't just heard. It was felt, deep inside his skull. Images began to flicker before his eyes, faces, lights, and something buried in blood. The old woman stepped closer, her hollow eyes fixed on him. "You still don't remember, do you?" she whispered. "What you did here before the circle broke?" Aram shook his head, trembling. "I've never been here before. I'm not part of this." Her cracked lips formed a thin smile. "Then why do you carry its mark?" He looked down at his arm. The sigil now covered half his body, glowing faintly beneath his skin like burning veins. The pain pulsed with the rhythm of the bells. Then, the world shifted again, that he was no longer standing by the fountain, that he was beneath it, in a stone chamber, the air thick with the stench of earth and iron. Torches flickered along the walls. Around him stood 5 robed figures, chanting softly in a language he couldn't understand. And in the center of the room lay a body. His own. Aram stumbled backward. "No, this isn't real." But it was. The body's face was his. Its eyes were hollow. The same sigil burned into its chest. He heard his own voice, but deeper, colder, speaking words he didn't understand. "The vessel must forget to begin anew," he gasped. The memory flooding back like ice watered. He wasn't a visitor. He had once led the ritual that cursed the entire village. The villagers had followed him, believing he could summon the spirit of the land to heal their dying crops. But something went wrong. The spirit demanded a life, his, and when he resisted, it consumed the entire village instead. They had trapped him inside his own creation, cursed to forget, to live endlessly in the circle he built. The memory vanished, and Aram collapsed to his knees in the present. The old woman stood above him. "You see now why you can't leave," she said softly. "You're not the victim, Aram. You're the beginning." He stared at her, voice breaking. "Then why bring me back? Why make me remember?" "Because the spirit stirs again," she said, pointing to the sky. The clouds had turned crimson, swirling in a spiral above the bell tower. "If you don't finish what you started, we will all fade, every soul bound to your sin." The wind roared through the streets, carrying screams. Not human screams, but the sound of something vast awakening. The church bell shattered mid-toll. The tower cracked down the middle, and from the pit beneath the village, light burst upward like fire. Aram rose slowly, determination cutting through the horror in his chest. "Then it ends tonight," he said. The old woman nodded once. "Then go to the heart, the place beneath where you died. Only there can you seal it." As she spoke, Her body began to crumble into dust, carried away by the wind. The last thing she whispered was, "Remember who you were, before you became what you are." Aram turned toward the church, the sigil across his skin burning like molten metal. Behind him, the houses screamed as the village began to twist inward, folding itself into the pit that he ran. Every shadow reached for him. Every whisper called his name, not in fear, but in reverence, because now the village remembered too. The church loomed before Aram like a relic of a dead god. Its walls cracked, its steeple half-collapsed, windows burning red from the light rising beneath. The air vibrated with whispers, ancient and furious. Every step he took across the courtyard felt heavier, as if the ground itself was resisting him. When he pushed the doors open, the world inside wasn't a church anymore. The pews had melted into the floor. The altar was a gaping hole that pulsed like a living wound. The scent of smoke and soil filled the air, thick and suffocating. From the darkness below, voices rose, thousands of them, overlapping, pleading, condemning. Aram stepped closer, looking into the pit. It wasn't empty. Beneath the swirling light, faces drifted. The villagers, trapped in a cycle of their last breath. And at the center of it all was the spirit it didn't have a form, only presence, a shifting mass of light and shadow, stretching across the chamber like a storm cloud trying to take shape. Every whisper, every cry, every heartbeat in the village came from it. The moment Aram's shadow fell across the pit, the spirit turned its gaze. 1,000 eyes opening at once, that a voice, layered and deep, echoed. Through the church, "You return, vessel of flesh." You remember. Aram's chest burned as the sigil flared bright, illuminating the room that he steadied himself. "I came to end it." The spirit's laughter thundered through the walls, cracking what remained of the ceiling. "You cannot end what you began. You bound me to the living, and in doing so, bound yourself. The circle is not broken. It is you." Aram's pulse pounded in his ears. The words hit harder than truth that he wasn't just cursed, he was the curse. His defiance, his arrogance, his fear had become the root that fed this endless nightmare. He fell to his knees, clutching his head as visions tore through his mind. He saw the villagers praying around him years ago, desperate, starving, that he saw himself promising salvation. He saw the ritual, the circle drawn in blood, the offering refused, the spirit unleashed, and then the explosion of light. The moment everything ended and began again, the spirit's voice softened, almost tender now. "Let go of your guilt, and you become me. Accept it, and the village will rest. The choice is yours, vessel." The air grew still. The sigil across his chest pulsed in rhythm with the pit. Aram could feel the souls of the villagers, all bound to him. Waiting, he realized that destroying the spirit meant destroying himself too. He closed his eyes. For the first time, he didn't resist that he stepped into the pit. The light swallowed him whole. Every memory, every scream, every echo of pain surged through his body. He saw every villager, every life he had trapped, and then, one by one, they began to fade, their faces softening into peace. The spirit screamed, not in anger, but in release. The ground shook. The church crumbled. The entire village trembled as centuries of pain dissolved into light. And then, silence. When the dust settled, there was no village, no church, only a wide, empty field under a pale dawn sky. In the center, where the pit once was, stood a single stone engraved with a circle, half dark, half light. That a figure stood beside it. It looked like Aram, but the eyes were calm now. That he smiled faintly, whispered something the wind carried away, and faded with the morning mist. The curse was broken, the circle complete.